Hey guys, remember that RPG mod that you all seem to love so much? Well, I'm playing it again, but with all sorts of your favorite mods, from Calamity all the way to the stars above. The first time around I did magic, the second time I did summon, the third time I did ranged, and the fourth time I did melee, but for this time, I found a little secret. If you go down the path that upgrades all of your damage instead of a specific type of damage, you know, the path that seems like it would be the worst, turns out that it's actually the best, because on a normal path, you can achieve a max of 250% increased damage, but if you just go straight down, you can upgrade your damage by 2000%. And this isn't even the cap, it goes even higher. The only downside to this is that the enemies get a lot harder. And I mean a lot harder, like millions of health and hundreds of thousands of damage harder. But anyways, enough of my rambling, and get ready to see some mayhem. As soon as I spawned in, I chose Eridani to be my Starfarer, and if you're not sure what a Starfarer is, they are hot anime girls that give you cool stuff and whisper sweet nothings into your ear. I then got to sorting out what I would use from the Calamity starter bag, but it's very hard to do so when dealing with a blue slime that has 2,000 health. Right off the bat, I found an enchanted sword and began farming enemies for levels. After I leveled up a few times, I chose the tourist class, since it's the only class I can use for now, and put the rest of my skill points into melee damage. I'm only going to be using the classes that are on the downward path, but I'll be allocating skill points to various other things because there isn't much I can do on the downward path right away. While continuing to kill enemies, I took a little stroll to the right and found a portal with a very strange guy underneath it named Noob. But it was absolutely useless since all I really sold was dirt and mud. I wanted to get more into summoning as soon as possible because in the most popular video on my channel, I was able to level my weapons up like crazy since you only gain XP for the weapon that's like in your hand. So I made myself an acorn bag and I now had a little squirrel friend to help me out. Once the night had passed, I continued exploring to the right and found some desert ruins, but I paid no attention to it and instead selected a new class since I'm now level 10 called the Apprentice. It increases all damage by 12.5% and my health by 5%. I also allocated all of my points towards summon damage instead of melee since my plan was to be a summoner anyways. After a bit more walking, I came across the Briar, but my trip was cut short because I'm an idiot. Now that I was home, I decided it was time to get some mining done, so I started mining straight down to get a hold of whatever my grubby little hands could get. While I was down there, I made a Moonflare staff. It summons a Moonflare Guardian, and this guy was pretty good. I was only able to get a few life crystals and a handful of ore before I decided that I needed to stop everything that I was doing and build a house. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but the signs are there. I built probably the best house that I've actually ever seen, and then switched back to using the squirrel summon after I watched the Moonflare Guardian embarrass the shit out of itself while trying to fight a flowering slime. Oh my god, what a nerd. I then made myself full cacti armor and just kind of wandered around until nighttime came, but once it came, I made a contraption called the Wolfram Lure so that I could fight a whole bunch of Wolfram enemies in hopes of getting some energy cores for the full Wolfram armor set. But all I got was a whole bunch of scrap, which I used to make a Wolfram controller. Once it was morning, I spiced up my house a bit and got started on my elevator to hopefully get more than just a handful of ore, but all I was met with was misery. I was stuck smashing these skeletons for like literally 30 minutes straight. Literally 30 minutes straight, until I was finally able to just get by them and grab myself my first whip, the pool noodle. Back on the surface, I was met by a tree bark dryad that seemed to only sell useless garbage, so I gave him a good old whip and went back to my elevator in hopes of finding life crystals, but all I could find was tungsten. Hey guys, future Oklah here. I recorded this next chunk on my laptop because I was way too lazy to get out of bed one morning and ended up losing all of the audio. The moral of the story is don't be lazy, I guess. Resume! I continued the elevator regardless and ended up finding enough life crystals for me not to worry about getting the rest of them. I was going to keep on mining, but a bunch of skeletons started throwing a party right outside of my house, and since the police don't exist in Terraria, I took matters into my own hands. After it was all over, I realized that I had way too much shit and not enough storage, so I built myself a beautiful dome-like house and made some magic storage. I also used windows on my house for literally the first time in my decade of playing this game. As soon as I was done with this, the Eye of Cthulhu spawned and I was able to take it out easy peasy. Eridani gave me an essence for beating the boss that creates a summon type weapon called the Konpaku Katana that gains strength from grazing danger, so I made it right away, and basically what it did was allow me to fire quick long range bullets, summon a phantom spirit, and generate an aura around me that gives me 30% increased damage when an enemy is within the aura. With this new awesome weapon, I decided it was time to take on some more bosses, so I headed over to the desert, summoned the Grand Thunderbird, and wiped it out without taking a single scratch. This was when I came to the conclusion that the enemies were getting way too easy, especially the bosses, so I opened up the config and increased the NPC growth per boss from 15 to 50, and the NPC growth on hard mode from 50 to 100. I then summoned the Grand Thunderbird again, and it was much more difficult, like its health went from 820 to 10,015. I had just been putting all of my stat points and skill points into summon damage, but since I was now level 27, I began putting my skill points into Life Leech, mainly because it was just the next skill down. I had also leveled up my katana a couple of times and made the damage go from 25 to probably around 40. I have no clue. I never checked it when I was like recording the video. After all this RPG talk, it was time to take out the King Slime, so I made a slimy crown and actually almost lost. The only thing that saved me was an attribute on an accessory that gives me like a 25% chance to gain health when taking a fatal blow. I got nothing of use from the King Slime, so I decided to just kill enemies for the night to level up my katana, but while doing so, the Keeper just spawned out of absolutely nowhere with no warning at all and ended up being more than I could handle. While fighting the Keeper, my katana ascended, which means that like my weapon reached its max amount of levels and then got a whole bunch of XP to ascend, and it went from around 40 damage to 64. I then decided to finally start making some NPC housing, mainly because when you're using Calamity, Thorium, the Stars Above, Siege of the Shadows, Spirit mod, Homeward Journey mod of Redemption, and the Vitality mod, you can bet your ass there are going to be an absurd amount of them. Once I had made like 8 rooms, I fought Thorn, Bane of the Forest, but he was no big deal. I was going to make some more rooms after fighting him, but some strange jellyfish started raining from the sky, so I spent my entire night fighting these guys, and yes, I leveled up a few times, but all this event really did was lag the shit out of my computer, because it's a shitty laptop. After the event, I headed over to the desert and defeated the Desert Scourge. I then made like 12 more rooms and summoned a demon to get the attention of the next boss, Urhan and Glonic High Priest, and at this point I was feeling pretty high and mighty since I'd been defeating every single boss on my first try, but this guy humbled the out of me when he summoned a beam of light from the sky that dealt over 2,000 damage. Even my next attempt was a little difficult due to him having almost 27,000 health, but I managed to defeat him regardless. Urhan ended up dropping his holy Bible for me to use as a summon weapon, and it was wonderful. Afterwards, I thought it would be a good idea to summon the Keeper right before night was over, and I was completely right. I turned that lovely lady into a not so lovely lady. Now that it was daytime, I decided that it was time to head on over to Observatory Hyperborea, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, to learn more about my situation as a star bearer, and all I learned was that there's this big war going on and that I was going to have to shoulder all of the responsibility of stopping it. I then headed back home and went to the glowing mushroom biome from earlier to defeat the next boss, the Glow Moth, but I accidentally stepped on the skeleton pressure plate while fighting it and just got absolutely bombarded with them, which caused me to lose focus and get hit with a glow shard that dealt 2,500 damage. But no worries, because I just went back and defeated the Glow Moth once the pressure plate was broken. Now that the bug had been squashed, I began looking for the sunken sea so that I could take on the giant clam, but while looking, a mini boss named Skulldigger spawned, and since he had less health than the last few bosses, I thought it would be an easy fight. But I died over and over and over again, and I eventually beat him, but it was annoying as hell. Eventually, I found the sunken sea and started fighting the giant clam, but while doing so, I did a shit ton of damage, like an absolute shit ton of damage, and I have no clue how I did it. Like the clam went from 65,000 health to 46,000 health in like actually 2 seconds. It was crazy. After a bit, I defeated the giant clam, and that random burst of damage caused my katana to ascend again, making its damage go from 64 all the way up to 296. My summon dealt 296 damage. That's absolutely insane. With my newfound strength, I decided to take a nice long stroll across the right side of my map to see all of the beautiful biomes that I generated. Once I was back home, those goddamn jellyfish from earlier started raining from the sky again, so I got to cleaning them up, but after a bit I realized that I was level 53 and could now use a new class which deemed me as regular. This class gave me 20% increased damage, 15% increased health, 10% increased armor, and caused my katana's damage to go from 296 to 365. That's 1 damage for every day of the year. I then continued slaughtering jellyfish, and since I'd forgotten to last time, I caught a Dreamlight Jelly and used it so that I could summon and defeat the Moon Jelly Wizard, and this guy was way too easy, thanks to my drastic increase in damage, that is. With that guy out of the way, I used a Grav Potion to get some clouds so that I could summon the Storm Cloud, but I defeated this guy in like actually 10 seconds, I counted. So I opened up the config and increased the NPC projectile level from 10 to 50, and increased the boss health multiplier from 1 to 2, and that seemed to make things much more even. I then went back to the glowing mushroom biome again and defeated Crabulon, who typically has anywhere from 3,000 to like 10,000 health, but instead had 86,335. I equipped the fungal clump that it drops and fought the Vagrant of Space and Time with it, and honestly, I couldn't tell whether it was doing anything or not. After I defeated him, I was given the Essence of Spinning that can be crafted into a yo-yo that kinda works like a whip, but in order to make it, I would need a flintlock pistol, and to get that, I would need to have the Arms Dealer NPC move in, and for him to move in, I would need just any old gun, so I headed over to the Corruption to get one. Once I had gotten a musket from one of the Shadow Orbs, I noticed that killing enemies had become way too easy. Like I was killing them within 3 hits, so I opened up the config and increased the NPC growth per boss from 100 to 200, and it looks like that gave the enemies just a little bit more edge. Eventually, I managed to gather up all the materials to make the Trick Spin 2-step, but it bounced off enemies every single time it hit, so I never really used it. I also tried making a new summon using the Essence of the Watch, and it looks really cool and deals lots of damage, but it just wasn't really a good fit for gaining like XP, so I didn't use this weapon either. Up next was the Eater of Worlds, so I just broke the orbs and summoned it without preparing anything, because I thought, how hard could this be? But this guy had over 400,000 health. 400,000 health. I obviously lost. I tried again using the same shred as last time, but still lost, and when I respawned, a goblin army was attacking my house, which was perfect, because now I can level up my gear. It took me literally 20 full minutes to defeat this goblin army, but my katana ascended, causing it to go from 365 damage all the way up to 614. It literally almost doubled in damage. I then went back to fighting the Eater of Worlds, and after a couple more attempts, I defeated it. Using the essences and the demonite I had gotten, I made a few new weapons, some that aren't summoner included, and summoned a goblin army to test them all out. But out of all of them, the only one that actually looked promising was the Vile Feeder. It summons tiny eaters of souls, and the only reason it was good was because the minions latched onto enemies instead of just shooting at them. As promising as it was, there was some sort of issue going on with the minions where sometimes they would latch onto enemies and not deal any damage, or sometimes they would just disappear for whatever reason. But the most annoying issue of all was that they would latch onto critters like butterflies and worms due to their increase in health. It was so annoying. By the time the goblin army had been dealt with, the Vile Feeder had only leveled up 7 times, but my katana had ascended again and went from 614 damage to 1,153. Using the key I had gotten from the Eater of Worlds, I unlocked the Desert Temple door, and as soon as I walked in, enemies started to spawn like crazy, which just caused my frames to plummet. After exploring it for a little while, I decided to leave and just summon another goblin army because the lag was just too much. I used this goblin army to continue leveling up my Vile Feeder because I felt that it could become really, really good, and after just one single ascension, it went from 60 damage to 147. Afterwards, I summoned the Eater of Worlds again to see if it was better than the goblin army in terms of like leveling up my gear, and it was much, much better. After just one Eater of Worlds, my Vile Feeder ascended and it now dealt 224 damage. Multiply that by the number of minions that I have, and it actually deals 672 damage. Oh, by the way, I got more summons by having an infinite summon potion and making a hat out of snake skin from the snakes in the Desert Temple. I fought the Eater of Worlds over and over and over again until the Vile Feeder reached ascending tier 4 and I had reached level 100, which I only noticed a bit later on in the Desert Temple and chose the next class, Expert. This class gave me 40% increased damage, 25% increased health, 50% increased armor, 5% decreased mana cost. It generated a grand mana shield which absorbs 10% of all incoming damage by using my mana, and it caused my katana to go from 1,153 damage to 1,345, and my Vile Feeder to go from 224 damage to 424. Once I switched classes, I figured that I would just get a bunch more snakeskin so I could make the full armor set and not just a hat. After like 10 minutes of farming, I went home, finished the armor set, and tested it out on the Grand Antlion, but it kind of sucked. Like, all it did was give me a few flying snakes as minions, but because this is like an RPG-related mod, the snakes don't scale very well and only dealt like 30 damage max. I'm also pretty sure the snakes were taking up hits that could have been dealt by my baby Eaters of Souls, so I just unequipped the pants. I then headed on over to the ocean to take on the next boss, the Queen Jellyfish, and things were going really, really good until I got sucked into her water spout and got bitch slapped for 15,000 damage. I tried again right afterwards and won, but only because she just kind of stopped attacking. For the next boss, I needed to get some vines, but I hate farming man-eaters, so I figured I would just fight the Queen Bee and then buy some from the Operator NPC, but things did not go as planned. Even though things didn't go as planned, my Vile Feeder ascended and went from 424 damage to 822. It just keeps on doubling. With my damage continuing to double, I summoned Thespian, the Act of Alchemy, and for some reason the stars above bosses are significantly stronger than all of the other bosses I've faced. I think there must be some sort of like cap as to how much damage they can take, because my minions should not only be dealing like a max of 300 damage. Regardless of the difficulty, I was about to defeat her when the attacks that were dealing 60 damage suddenly dealt 5,165 damage. So I summoned her again and made sure just to not sit around. From her, I got the Essence of Hydra that allowed me to make a weapon that inherits bonuses from both magic and summon damage, but since I currently have 40% increased damage overall, it already dealt a base damage of over 2,000, and when I tested it out on an enemy, the minions were dealing almost 1.5 million damage. The weapon was also getting XP like crazy, with it already having ascended like 3 times and now dealing over 12,000 damage, so I just scrapped the weapon. I was at home feeling a little defeated since I was still using the same katana from the very beginning, but I then remembered I got this essence for defeating Thespian called Essence of Dancing Seas, so I used it to make the Wave Dancer, and this was by far the best weapon I got to use all game. It summoned an Ocean Blessed Blade that would seek out enemies, but I could also use left click to control the blade myself, and when doing this I could press a button on my mouse to slash in the area surrounding the weapon. It was awesome. After making this weapon, jellyfish started raining from the sky again, and after just a short period of time, it had already ascended twice, going from 128 damage to 340. I then used the Wave Dancer to take out the Queen Bee, who had almost 150,000 health with ease. Once I knew I would be using this weapon for a while, I decided to spend some more time using it against the goblin army to level it up, and by the end of the slaughter, it ascended 3 more times and went from 128 damage to 1,219. It was now time to deal with the next boss, the Vine Wrath Bane, and another good property about the Wave Dancer was that it was wonderful at looking for things through walls since it glowed, but even with that, I just couldn't find the arena where the Vine Wrath Bane was supposed to be fought. It took me almost 10 full minutes of searching before I found it, and when I summoned the boss, I defeated it in like 30 seconds, like both phases in 30 seconds. It was just because my Wave Dancer dealt way too much damage, so I opened up the config and raised the NPC projectile level from 50 to 100, the NPC damage multiplier from 1 to 2, and the boss health multiplier from 2 to 3, and this made things much more dangerous for me. Afterwards, I kind of just stood there and did nothing for a while, but then I remembered that I was supposed to be fighting bosses, so I summoned the Seed of Infection and just barely survived this guy. From the Seed of Infection, I got a new summon called the Diseased Meatball, and this summon showed a lot of promise, mainly because it could just like stick to enemies. I tried using my Wave Dancer to help the Diseased Meatball level up, but for some reason, whenever I summoned this one, the other would just despawn. I don't know. This was going to become a big issue later, but for now, my Diseased Meatball ascended and went from 54 damage to 139. I then summoned a goblin army to help level up my meatball, and after the slaughter, it dealt 371 damage. It was now time to take on some more bosses, so I decided to take on some of them that I skipped ages ago. First off was the Torch God for some reason, then Scarabus, then Patchwork, and finally the Occultist. After all these guys had been taken care of, my Wave Dancer now dealt 2,752 damage, which is now much more damage than I've seen in any other like actual mod before. Up next was Viscount, so I made my way on over to its lair. Once I was there, I summoned it, and other than having over 600,000 health, it didn't have much going for it, so I opened up the config and raised the NPC projectile level from 100 to 300, but Viscount still did like no damage, so I lowered the NPC projectile level from 300 to 150 and just assumed that it was a Viscount only issue. Afterwards, I made my way on over to the Corruption to fight the Hive Mind, and it officially became the first boss to reach over 1 million health. Mid-fight, I noticed that the boss was barely doing any damage, so I raised the NPC damage multiplier from 2 to 4, finished off this weak-ass Hive Mind, and raised the NPC damage multiplier from 4 to 6, just to be sure that things would be harder. The next boss was the Ancient Avian, so I used a Graph Potion to locate a cloud with a weird-ass egg on it and summon the boss, but since this boss was a projectile-based boss, I defeated it with ease. While being up in the sky, some harpies spawned, and I noticed that while trying to make the bosses harder, I accidentally made the enemies practically invincible, with some of them having 500,000 health and dealing over 10,000 contact damage. So I lowered the NPC damage multiplier back down from 6 to 3, raised the boss health multiplier up from 4 to 6, and raised the NPC projectile level from 150 just all the way up to 1,000. To test out these new config modifications, I summoned the next boss, Putrid Pinky, but I died right away after a Pinky Laser initially dealt 1,454 damage, and then suddenly dealt 1,262,083 damage. Over 1 million damage! What's going on? And just to make matters worse, when I respawned, I was suddenly healing for thousands of health every second, so I closed my game and reopened it. After reopening my world, I realized that I was now level 157, which meant I could access the next skill down on my skill tree, which gave me 50 extra spirit, and I could also now access a new class called Master. This new class gave me 70% increased damage, 40% increased health, 20% increased armor, 10% decreased mana cost, an extra summon, and a grand mana shield that absorbed 15% of damage using my mana. With my new Master class, my Wave Dancer now dealt 3,514 damage. I then summoned the Putrid Pinky again, but I came across the same issue as last time, so I just went with it and defeated the boss, but even with the constant health regeneration, this boss was hard. I fought the Putrid Pinky a few more times to get enough goop wood to make the full goop wood armor set, and it did literally the exact same shit as my snakeskin armor from last time, but I left this armor on anyway. During all of this, my Wave Dancer ascended again, and it now deals just over 4,000 damage. Afterwards, I cleared out an area to fight the Old One's army to level up my meatball, but all it really did was lag the shit out of my computer and prove to me just how much better my Wave Dancer is than my meatball. So I decided to throw the meatball away and only use the Wave Dancer from now on until I find something actually worthwhile. The next boss was the Pharaoh's Curse, so I gathered up all of the ruby keystones needed to enter its lair and summoned it, but with the combination of lag from the rest of the temple and just the brute strength that this boss possessed, it was gonna be a rough one. I tried over and over and over again, but this temple was just too goddamn laggy, so I lowered the boss health multiplier down and defeated the curse that way. Call me a cheater all you want, but floating through the air like I drank a feather falling potion was not it. Once I was done dealing with that god-awful temple, I noticed that my Wave Dancer had ascended again and now dealt just under 7,000 damage. 7,000 damage! I then made an arena for the gemstone elemental and summoned it, but I got murked by a stupid ass topaz gemstone that dealt 105,000 damage. But no worries, because I just beat the elemental on my next try. Later that night, I decided it was finally time to take on the Skeletron, who had over 4 million health mind you, but the Skeletron in this mod just didn't cooperate correctly. Like, my damage seemed to work nicely against the hands, but it seemed to be cut in half against the head, which made me run out of time in the night, and I lost. I may have lost to the Skeletron, but I was now level 200, which meant I could access the next skill in my skill tree, which just gave me a 20% increase in my summon damage. This new skill alone gave my Wave Dancer another 1,000 damage. Once I was done assigning my skill points, I decided to talk to the traveling merchant just to see what he had to sell, and he had this cool Rogue Ronin vanity set, so I bought it and learned that even vanity items can have like special attributes. I began buying and selling this vanity set to get the best modifiers on it possible. I was specifically going for having both the increase in item XP modifier and the increase in regular XP modifier. After like 10 minutes of just selling back and forth, I finally had a Rogue Ronin set that would give me an increase in my regular XP by 69.85% and an increase in my item XP by 107.45%, and that applied to all 3 articles of clothing for a grand total of 209.55% increased regular XP and 322.35% increased item XP. I then went and defeated Skeletron and gained like 10 levels from doing this, so I think the vanity set is working wonders. I also went and defeated the Marquee Moon Squid. If you guys have been paying attention, you've probably noticed at some point a random status message in the bottom left corners popping up and saying, the advisor is no longer after you. For some reason, there's been some sort of issue with this boss and it was now finally time to check it out, so I made my way up to the planetarium and found my issue immediately. The only way to summon this boss is by defeating the otherworldly constructs that surrounded it, but for some reason, this RPG mod is causing these constructs to multiply like crazy. Like there are literally dozens of them on top of each other. Even though this was obviously some sort of bug, it turned out to be a pretty good XP farm, so I decided to destroy all of the constructs, which allowed me to reach level 225 and choose my next skill, which gave me 200 spirit points and made my Wave Dancer now deal over 11,000 damage. I unfortunately had to skip the advisor and move on to another space-themed boss, the Starplate Voyager. I lost the first time around because bro had 1.7 million health and dealt like 67,000 damage to me, but thankfully I won the second time around even though bro had basically 2 million health. It was now finally time to defeat the last pre-hard mode boss, the Wall of Flesh, and while preparing for this fight my Wave Dancer ascended and now dealt 12,808 damage. I also reached level 250 and became the perfect being. This new class gave me 100% increased damage, 100% increased health, 25% increased armor, 25% decreased mana cost, an extra summon, a grand mana shield that now absorbs 25% of damage using my mana, and my Wave Dancer now deals over 15,000 damage. Despite all of the damage that I deal now, I decided to make the Hell Highway just as long as I usually do, and when I summoned the Wall of Flesh, it had just over 4 million health. 4 million health. And it only had one eye for some reason, but honestly this boss was so easy without all of the hunger trying to eat you. With the defeat of the Wall of Flesh, I was now level 300 and selected the last skill in my tree, the Gambler, which would either take all of the damage I receive and turn it into health, or double the damage instead. I still had a whole bunch of skill points left over, so I put them into summon damage, and the damage of my Wave Dancer literally doubled from 15,000 damage to 33,850, which is just absolutely insane. Before I fought any more bosses, I wanted to level up like crazy. Like get to level 1000 crazy, so I did what I thought was the best way to do so. I made a Zerg potion, which significantly increases enemy spawn rates, and headed over to where the snow biome and the astral biome from Calamity met, and set up a little safe room for myself, and then drank the potion and let the carnage commence. Almost immediately, I was blessed with an Ancient Ice Chunk, which, if you didn't know, is like the best summon in all of Calamity, and only like 15 minutes into this farming session, the weapon had already ascended 10 times and dealt a whopping 47,793 damage. After only 15 minutes! I continued doing this for the next full half hour and watched my Ancient Ice Chunk go from 47,793 damage to, and I am not kidding you, 22,831,756 fucking damage. Excuse my language, but this is absolutely absurd. And if you couldn't already tell, I was over level 900 and leveling up once like every other second. Only a few short minutes later, I reached level 1000 and got a status message that read, "Your character has reached the limit of his mortal body and is unable to gain more power." So I closed out of the game and reloaded my world. Once my world was open, a new skill appeared at the bottom of my skill tree named Limit Break Ascend, and it would cost me pretty much all of my skill points, so I did as my weapon has been and ascended. I now had a whole new skill tree to uncover and a new class to use titled Ascended, which gave me 400% increased damage, 150% increased health, 50% increased armor, 75% decreased mana cost, 2 extra minions, My Grand Mana Shield has now been increased from 25% to 75%, and my Ancient Ice Trunk now deals just over 1 million damage, which is kind of disappointing, but I guess I had to be humbled before enabling my true potential. At this point, I realized I was taking way too long to defeat all these bosses, and I still had literally like more than half of them left to go, so I decided to spice things up a bit with a montage. With me nearing the end of this non-stop carnage, it was now time to fight the Ravager, but this is where the game just kinda broke. As soon as I would summon the Ravager, I would deal like a shit ton of damage to him, but then suddenly I would only be able to do a single damage to it for the rest of the fight. This same issue persisted with Nalhan the Burnished King, and I'm no genius, so I'm not sure why this would happen, but at this point I had deemed the game broken. So with all of the bosses not working, there was only one thing left to do: finish my skill tree. I used the Jungle Temple to get this done, and by the end of everything, and I mean literally everything, my Ancient Ice Trunk dealt 1,027,202,752 damage.